Okay, hello everybody. How's it going? How are you, Bob?
I'm doing great. There's a lot of snow on the ground, but it's not too actually there's snow on the ground for me, but not for you, I would imagine, right? Did you get any snow down in North Carolina?
No, so it is actually, let's see, 56 here, so it's not too bad.
56. Let's see. It's 42 here, but there's a lot of snow on the ground. But the good thing is that unlike the snow from a month ago, this stuff is it's wet, it's warm out, it's going to be gone in a few days, so hopefully
Yeah,
we're on a track to spring.
yeah. I know my sister up in New York City was sending me videos from this past weekend, just so much snow. Yeah, it's
A
crazy.
lot.
I'm ready for spring. We're getting there. All right. If you are new here, I'm Paris Williams. I'm the MC for these bi-weekly office hour sessions, joined here with Bob Miller, the owner of Ironside IT Partners. Each session starts with a brief topic, and then we open the floor for Q&A. So feel free at any time to drop your questions in the Q&A box. They also don't have to be related to today's topic, so any IT or cybersecurity questions that you have, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. You can also submit questions in advance through our website to be answered during the next session. So I'll put the link to that as well in the chat. Today's topic is the dark web. What's actually there and why should I care? Bob will be covering this session topic and answering your questions. I did want to mention that each session is recorded and we will be posted to our YouTube channel, so that should be up by the end of today. But Bob, I will hand it over to you.
Great, thanks. Also, just one more thing. I always forget to say this at the end. I think I should probably say it, or maybe we should add it to what you say. I don't know. But if anybody has any suggestions about future topics, let us know. We kind of go by what we talk about in our meetings with clients and just what we brainstorm about. But if there's something that you specifically would like to hear about, no matter what it is, let us know and we'll cover it. We have a cross section of clientele across the country and across different industries. So there's a lot that we can offer to be of value. So please let us know about that. All right, I'm going to share my screen. So today's topic is the dark web, what's actually there and why should I care? It rhymes unintentionally, I assure you. If I had thought of that about that, then I would have made sure it didn't rhyme, but it does. So this is where we are. All right, next slide. There we go. Okay. So, what is the dark web? Well, let's look at what the web is overall, the internet as we know it. And we'll kind of use this iceberg analogy. If you went to school and learned about Sigmund Freud, this might seem familiar, but we'll use this because it's familiar and just to talk about the dark web. So, exploring the hidden internet is what this slide is called. If you look at the top of the iceberg, what's visible that's the surface web. That's what you actually interact with for the most part on the internet. If you go and look at news on the internet, if you go onto like Twitter, I'm sorry, X, if you go to Facebook, things like that, those are that's the surface web, Reddit, things like that. That's what you can get to via search engines. That's kind of like the distinguishing um, characteristic of the surface web. Is it something that Google can index? Is it something that you're going to search for when you go to Google or Bing or something like that? Are you able to search it and collect data on it? And nowadays, we're talking about not just Google and Bing, but ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, things like that. So, is it searchable? And is it easily accessible without having to log into anything? It's all public data. That's the surface web. Now, shockingly, that's only about 4 or 5% of the actual internet is what's indexed by Google, which you can just get to publicly without logging in. It's not that much of the internet. The majority of the internet is what we would call the deep web. And everybody logs into the deep web. Everybody knows what that is. That's if you log into your bank account, deep web. It's if you get legal documents from your attorney and via a portal, deep web. If you listen, guys, I know we're doing it too. It's tax season, right? So if you're logging into the IRS's website or your state's website, that's the deep web. Um, and anything like that, where you have to log in and the public and the data is not publicly available just for Google to search, that's the deep web. And that's like 90% of the internet. So, all right, And that's what everybody's very familiar with. This 95-ish% of the internet is the surface web and then the deep web. And then what we have left is what's called the dark web. And on the dark web, that's about 5 or 6% of the internet. On the dark web is where you can buy illicit drugs, for example. You can obtain illegal information, which is primarily what we're concerned about on this webinar. And generally, you'll know that you're on the dark web if you're accessing it via the Tor browser. We'll talk about that in a second. So, what exactly are these? Is the dark web? The dark web is characterized by specifically anonymous hosting and anonymous access. That's where the browser, typically Tor, obscures who you are and also obscures who they are, but allows you still to connect together. So it's harder to trace your identity and your location. Now, because it's anonymous, it's great for privacy. It's really good for privacy. And that's actually what it was designed for. But because it's very private and thoroughly anonymous, it also lends itself to the criminal marketplace. And that's a lot of what we'll talk about today. You can also do a lot of crypto payments via the Tor network, via the dark web as well, for obvious reasons, because crypto, in many cases, not all, in many cases, is designed to have an anonymous component to it. Now, Tor. Tor is the method that you generally use to connect to the dark web. And the Tor is just a browser. It's called the Onion browser. You can download it right now, and you can use it to access the regular internet or the dark web. But you could only access the dark web or the Tor sites, the Onion sites, via Tor. And again, they're not indexed by Google. And the way that it works, the next slide will show it to you. There are a variety of different relays that are all around the world. And when you connect in, if you look on the slide on the left-hand side where it says client node, that's you. If you connect in via the first relay, which is not just randomly assigned to you, it will connect you to lots of other relays along the path until eventually you get to the exit relay and then to the server node, which is the site that you're trying to connect to. Now, why it's called the Onion or the Tor browser is because each of these relays acts as a layer. And all that's known in the layer is the entry point and the exit point. It's all that's known of each layer. So it's impossible because there are so many different layers, or generally impossible to know what the source, the ultimate source, and the ultimate destination is, because only each individual layer only knows what the other layer, how to access the other layer. So it allows you to connect to things pretty anonymously. And this is very tried and true technology. Nothing should ever be spoken of in absolutes when we're talking about cybersecurity. So, but it is very secure and very anonymous browsing. But that's how it works. So it obscures the source, it obscures the destination, yet you can still connect and talk to each other. And that's why it's anonymous. So on the dark web, the main focus of what we're concerned about as small and medium businesses or small and medium enterprises is what is actually for sale on the dark web that can impact my organization. Well, basically everything. Stolen email and password combinations is huge. Business RDP and VPN credentials. So if you've ever had, so RDP is the remote desktop protocol, and it used to be common in the early 2000s, particularly for RDP to be open to the internet, so that way somebody could connect in to their PC from home or something like that. Even then it was very insecure, but we used to come across it all the time in onboarding new clients. We don't really see it very often anymore, but it used to be very common. So if you've been in business for any period of time, you probably have come across this. And it was super common back then, 20 years ago or so, to buy and sell RDP credentials, usernames and passwords, so that way you could get instant access to a network remotely. Now that all cyber insurance liability policies and all best practices forbid or discourage the use of RDP public to the internet, what's now commonly traded are VPN credentials, SSL VPN, IPsec VPN, certain things like that. And those are great ways for threat actors to connect into networks, because once connected, they've got access to at least one computer, if not the entire network. And once they have access to the entire network, they can start moving laterally from one computer to the next until eventually they get to a server, and then they find an exploit because of an open vulnerability, and then now they've got control over everything. And it's this is one of the most common attack vectors we're seeing in businesses here in 2025, 2026. So easy, it's an easy thing to find on the dark web are these VPN credentials. Microsoft 365 accounts also really common to find these, really common to buy and sell them and gain access to at least a mailbox, if not then the entire Microsoft 365 tenant. There are certain ways that they can do that, particularly if the administrator credentials are on the dark web, which has happened. So we have to be careful about that. Compromised firewalls and networks. Imagine this right now, your company's firewall administrator credentials could be on the dark web for sale right now. It happens. But if it's compromised, it's not always the case that the person who or the service that compromised the network or the firewall then continues to uh, take over the network for their own gain. Sometimes they do that just to be able to sell these compromised networks on the dark web and then let other people do the rest of the work. And all that they do is just do the initial compromise. Super common, happens all the time, which is one of many reasons why. And if anybody on this office hours has ever talked with me personally, which I think most of you have, you've probably heard me spout the statistic that it's an average of 200 days from first breach to you notice the breach. That's an average in the United States of how long it takes from when the first breach happens to when you actually notice that it happens, which means that the network has been compromised for about 200 days. Now, that's an average. The crazy thing is that that average has been the same every year since 2018. That's nuts. So, and this is one of the reasons why, because the compromise happens and then they sell the credentials on the dark web. And then that's when the actual compromise starts to be engaged. Other things you can find on the dark web are social security numbers and other personally identifiable information called PII. And then finally, another very common thing is ransomware-as-a-service or phishing-as-a-service kits. And that's where somebody develops the means, either software or an actual like live server that they host for themselves. The people then sell those scripts or the servers to be used by other attackers for the actual attack that they're produced that they're making against their target, which it sounds a lot like software as a service because it is. It is literally the software as a service model, the same model that almost all businesses use for their accounting, ERP, customer relationship management software, whatever. It's the same model that they use. There are developers for ransomware as a service. All that they do is develop that service, and other people then use that service to launch attacks. Crazy. So that's available on the dark web as well. And here's what's really nuts is how much does it cost? Well, email credentials, pretty common. They go for as little as $1, sometimes less, depending on the administrator level and the employee itself. Remember that also what's known on the dark web and what's available is not just email credentials, but also usernames and the relationship between users. Who are your vendors? Who are your customers? Who do the vendors talk to? Who do the customers talk to? The individual users. All that's mapped out so that way they can then target a user with what sounds like a legitimate email. So if Mary Sue always gets an email from, I don't know, Billy Bob over from a vendor, and she always gets emails from this person for, let's say, for ACH requests or things like that. Well, that's easily discovered, and then that's easily sold and now easily had by an attacker who then can impersonate Billy Bob with Mary Sue and convince her to do an ACH deposit or withdrawal directly to him. So email credentials, as inexpensive as they are, they can add up really quickly to be a significant threat to your network. RDP or VPN access, it's 50 to $500 each full network access, I mean, 500, 5,000, maybe even more, depending on the size of the target and other factors such as the vulnerability of the target. If the target's very vulnerable, it goes for less money because there's less work to do. Um, but I'm sorry, more money because there's less work to do. But either way, all of this is easily had and easily sold and bought on the dark web. Think about it. Your company is most likely cheaper than an iPhone. Your whole company, the entire network, can be had for less than the cost of an iPhone. So, how does your data get there on the dark web? Well, one of the biggest ways is phishing attacks. We know what those are. Those are emails that come in. They try to get you to click on a link, enter your Microsoft 365 credentials or some other type of credential, and then now that information is stolen, and it could be sold. Another thing is infostealers. Infostealers are rising rapidly in popularity right now, and that's malware, very basic malware that runs on the computer that just directly steals the passwords right off of the computer, which is one of the many reasons why we suggest using password managers. If you're not using one, please talk to us. All of our clients get it for free. And yes, if you've been on our office hours multiple times, you've heard me mention this every single time because it's that important. Password reuse. Okay, same plug for password management software. And then of course breaches from not doesn't have to be your network. It could be other people's networks that they just have different pieces of your data that can then be assembled to be sold as a larger whole. Now, how do you know if you're on the dark web? Well, there are dark web monitoring tools. There's other services. You can do credential monitoring. There are threat intelligence feeds, which we monitor as well. There are audits and assessments that can be done. But here's the thing about the dark web is as with all the threats all the time, assume you're on it because you probably are. Ever since the Experian compromise uh, last decade, Experian being the Credit Monitoring Bureau, which is a quasi-governmental organization, ever since that compromise and that breach that they had, nobody's information is private anymore. You have to assume that your social security number is public knowledge now. You have to assume your birth date, your mother's maiden name, that these common pieces of information are all public and available on the dark web, potentially just for free, you know. And you have to assume that you're on it. Same thing with your business. You have to assume that you are on it and that anybody can buy access at any time to an email account or something like that, maybe your whole network. You have to make that assumption. Because what do we do about it? The answer is the same. It's layered security. There is no one single security measure that protects against any of these things because the bad guys are too smart. They know what we're using to protect networks and they do everything they can to circumvent it. But they also know that the majority of small and medium enterprises don't actually use layered security because they're not fully aware of the security threat that they have to live with. So they just use some partial security. But what do we have to do for layered security? What do I mean by that? I'm talking about multi-factor authentication. And everybody's heard about it. I think it's largely deployed, but there are still gaps. And it's important to make sure MFA is enforced across the board. Conditional access policies, that is becoming much, much more important as time goes on, as threat actors are finding ways around Microsoft 365. Logins and ways to get in. Conditional access policies are critical to stopping some of these logins. Again, password manager, endpoint detection and response, that has pretty widespread adoption now, which means it's greater than just antivirus. We're talking about behavioral monitoring on the endpoint. Identity threat detection and response, we're seeing a lot more of this now too, which is a similar thing, but for Microsoft 365 environments, it's based on the user instead. So those two things are key, but these other things are becoming significantly more important because those other two have a much more of an ubiquitous adoption to them. So zero trust networking and application control is becoming hugely important in 2026 here. Security awareness training, always very important, required by virtually every cyber liability insurance policy that's out there. as well as regular penetration testing, also required by every cyber liability insurance policy that's out there. If you're not doing some of these things, please talk to us. We'll help you point you in the right direction on that. So here are the big takeaways for the dark web. Small and medium enterprises are common targets because access is cheap. You have to assume that your identity is already on the dark web because it almost certainly is. And not just your identity, but your business's identity, your individual users, network access, things like that. So prevention control and layered security are essential to protecting against the threats that are out there on the dark web. So we'll turn it over to you. And Paris, any questions? What do we have so far?
Yes, we did get some questions in. The first one being, how long does stolen data stay on the dark web?
Uh, like forever. It doesn't go away. So stolen data on the dark web, uh, it's not like a file cabinet in your office. If your office still has file cabinets where it takes up space, it doesn't take up space, so it can just stay there forever. It does get replaced with newer data, but and eventually it's just not going to get sold anymore if it's too old. But you have to assume that not only that your data is out there, but that it's permanently out there. For example, your social security number that I mentioned from that experience breach last decade, your social security number is just known. It just is. It's not going anywhere.
If we're in the process of buying another company, should we scan the dark web for them?
You could, yeah. I mean, it would give you. I think if you're in an M&A situation, a mergers and acquisition situation, then you should do your due diligence across the board. We can help you with that, but you could. It's one of the times where I think dark web scanning might be helpful. I think what is the most helpful is though doing a true penetration test of your I don't know if it's a merger or just an acquisition, but of that other company, doing a full penetration test of that and getting an analysis done of what they do. Also hugely important is, are they following their cyber security liability insurance policy requirements and any regulatory requirements as well? Because if they're not, then they could already be targeted, because companies that have those requirements, they have them for a reason, because they're targets for a lot of these things. And so it's critical that those things are um, that they're staying on top of this. So I would look at that. I would also look at what policies they have. Are they do they have mature developed policies, and are they following them? That's actually a huge question. So we can always take that offline to talk more about that. But those are some of the basics that I would do.
Okay, the next one is, if we have good security protection, should we even be worried about the dark web?
Yeah, well, so what's good mean, right? Because if you're um so when we're talking about layered security, I don't have the slide up right now, but I use it often is the 21 fundamental blocks of cybersecurity. And these are the 20. I should probably just keep this ready to go because I mentioned this last time as well. The 21 fundamental blocks of cybersecurity are the 21 areas that every organization needs to at least consider. Some things don't apply to you depending on your industry vertical, right? And some things don't apply to you if you don't have regulatory requirements. But in general, all 21 of these fundamental blocks should always be used as a basis to analyze what you're doing with your cybersecurity. Um, so, so good security might I don't it's good as just such a subjective word, but what we want to look at is layered security and what's the risk level that your organization has um, in each of these different areas, and what's the impact and the likelihood that something is going to happen in each of those areas. And so those should be analyzed to determine what security is appropriate for you. So if you've got you to really to protect yourself against the dark web, you need to have a good layered security approach that is always being evaluated. It's not just a one-time thing. It should never be a reactive thing to when you actually have a breach. It should always be something that you're consistently analyzing. So most of our clients we do quarterly security briefings with, where we meet once a quarter and we look at what's trending. For example, I mentioned earlier, infostealers are trending right now. They're becoming much more of a risk than they were this time last year. And so, it doesn't necessarily mean we do much different. It could mean that we target security awareness training differently, or it mean there each quarterly security briefing has different takeaways and different priorities from it. Sometimes there are some new tools to consider. Sometimes there's new budgeting to consider for the following year. And sometimes it's just simply let's do some user training that we're not currently doing. It really depends on what's happening. So layered security is absolutely essential, and keeping on top of that with quarterly security briefings or education opportunities like this are crucial.
Okay, the next question is, say someone purchased access to our Microsoft 365, what can they actually do?
Well, if they got a user account, then they can do a lot. So they can go in. Typically, what happens is when there's a business email compromise, that's what that's called, a BEC. When there's a business email compromise, the user's account is accessed, not restricted to the user. The user can still use it, but the threat actor now has access to that mailbox. Typically, the first thing they do is they create rules for behavior, because often what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the user to do something, and they want to get them to transfer money out, for example. So they might take emails that are legitimate. It's that example I used earlier with Mary Sue and Billy Bob, right? So if it's Mary Sue's account that got compromised, then the threat actor might make a rule that says Billy Bob's emails get diverted to trash, and then her trash is emptied so that she'll never know. And then instead take emails from Billy Bob at gmail.com, something like that, and deliver those to the inbox in an attempt to confuse her and make her think that that's the actual real Billy Bob that she talks to, and she exchanges money with. Now he'll say something on the next email. Hey, I've got new ACH details for the next payment. Here they are. And that happens, unfortunately, a lot. We get that pretty regularly where we have new clients that come on board and it's not long after they've suffered that type of an attack. So anyway, that's an example of what can happen if the 365 credentials are stolen. Another thing is if it's your global administrator for your tenant, if those are stolen, um, which we often see through daily driver admin accounts. That's where your primary IT person or the person who handles IT for your organization internally logs into the 365 environment with global admin credentials um, routinely, consistently, meaning that that person um, has global administrator rights even for their daily email or account. If that happens, their credentials are much more likely to be stolen because they use them all the time. And if a threat actor has access to the global administrator account, they can do literally anything. I mean, they can do anything. Talk about obfuscation. Mary Sue doesn't stand a chance because with the rules that you can apply to a whole tenant, Mary Sue and all of her coworkers in accounting don't stand a chance because it's not just Billy Bob they can impersonate, it's everybody else. And they can make it look real because now they have the power of the entire Microsoft 365 tenant and Exchange Online, Azure Active Directory, things like this, Entra ID. They have the power of all of Microsoft's tools at their disposal to do whatever they want. So it's actually very scary. So that's another thing. And I've mentioned that before is daily driver administrator accounts are incredibly dangerous. So
Okay, the next question is it an actual person who's attacking us or is it script kiddies?
so yeah, so it's okay, small and medium enterprises, it's typically not an actual person. It's constant scans that are run all the time. The software, or the ransomware as a service, they're scanning and they're looking for holes. They're when a new vulnerability comes out, as soon as a new vulnerability comes out for a firewall or a software package or something like that, before you may have even had a chance to apply the patch. And we had an office hours about this, I think a couple of months ago, earlier this year. Um, the threat, the risk that you have for that vulnerability is massive right now because those guys, the ransomware as a service guys, are already ready to go as soon as that is public. They're ready to go to exploit that vulnerability. Maybe even before you've had a chance to apply it or before you've had a chance to vet it to be applied. Um, so all of that is locked and loaded in automation tools, um, in scanning bots, things like that. And then oftentimes those credentials are then just held onto, or the information about what vulnerability there is on a network, and that can be bought and sold on the dark web. Once that happens, then it's typically an actual human being somewhere in the world who's making an attempt to break into the network. And that's another reason why, again, it's usually about 200 days from when the breach first occurs to when you actually notice the fallout from the breach. It's because of things like that, because a lot of it is automated, and that's part of what's scary about this is that it can be happening right now. In fact, it happens all the time, and nobody's aware of it. And it could be happening right now to somebody on this call.
Okay, I have one more question here. Does cyber insurance require dark web monitoring?
It depends on the policy. We can always look at the policy with you and to look at it. I probably not though, but we would need to look at it to know for sure. Probably not because um, dark web monitoring used to be very popular 5, 10 years ago, and a lot of cybersecurity firms and a lot of IT management firms like ours were really promoting it. We actually never really did because we always took the way we approach everything with cybersecurity. It's all based on risk mapping and what's your actual risk. If you assume that your data is out there on the dark web, which is the tack that we have always taken, if you assume that, then you have to have a layered security approach to protect against it. So we don't like suggesting companies spend money on something that they don't need. And I just don't feel that that's an appropriate thing. If you have the money, let's spend it on what you actually need. And instead of spending money on dark web monitoring, we should spend money on layered security because dark web monitoring just says yes or no, here's the data that's out there. And if you assume that the data is out there, then we still have to do the same thing. We still have to have a layered security approach. And it's much better to do that. It does help, maybe to know if there's a specific user account that's been compromised, but with good conditional access policies and good identity threat detection and response, you can protect against those things. Um, we just don't see a ton of value. However, if cybersecurity liability insurance requires it, or if there's some sort of regulatory agency requirement, I'm not aware of any though, off the top of my head. If they require it, then we have to do it. It's got to get done because the last thing you want is to be in a scenario where you have a breach and now there's an audit or an investigation, depending on whether it's insurance or a regulatory agency, and we find out that you're not doing something that they required you to do. Now you're in for a world of hurt. Maybe not getting a claim filled, or maybe having fines, or maybe be opening up to lawsuits. So we recommend always doing what the insurance company requires or what the regulatory agencies require because of that. So that's it's a little bit of a complex answer, but it's a nuanced question though, surprisingly.
Okay, I think that was all of the questions.
Great.
The recording for this session should be up by end of day today on our YouTube channel. Our next session is going to be on March 11th. You can join using the same Zoom link that you used today, so feel free to send that to anyone you think would benefit from these sessions. Remember, you can submit questions or a topic idea in advance on our website or shoot us an email, and we will see everyone at the next session. Bye, everyone. Thank
Right,
you.
bye.